Groups, which was well established during the siege in Waco and becomes more clear as we see how these groups play a role in the New World Order. In this 1993 Army Field Manual 100-20, Special Operations Forces are particularly well suited to domestic support missions. Domestic means they are to be used on us here in the United States. They are under the U.S. Special Operations and Special Operations Integration Command. They also have a Civil Affairs sister unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Civil Affairs units are propaganda units. Waco was one such domestic support operation involving local and federal law enforcement and military, as shown in the ATF final report. On pages 73 and 78, you can see that the raid was planned by Special Forces from Fort Bragg. The main ATF planner, Bill Buford, was former Special Forces. The raid on Waco was conducted as a military assault, and in our Waco tapes you will plainly see that military Special Forces were in Waco the day Mount Carmel was burned down. Last, the two evaluators, Rod Pascal and Wayne Ishimoto, were both retired Delta Force commanders. Remember, Delta Force is another name for Task Force 160. Here we see another example of training for a domestic support operation, as a military unit on maneuvers at Fort Polk, Louisiana, is trained in house-to-house search and seizures and forcible entry as reported in Soldiers magazine. Fort Polk, Louisiana is now a joint UN training center, and even the U.S. Marshal Service in Pineville is training marshals to be employed all over the world. This is the look of our future law enforcement, as UN troops from all countries practice house-to-house searches and seizures on us. Sound paranoid? Take a look at this National Institute of Justice bulletin that speaks of a multi-jurisdictional task force unit and blatantly brags that asset seizures ensures the financial viability of these task forces. Examine newspaper articles and you'll see plenty of proof of these multi-jurisdictional task forces, breaking into homes without warrants as they did in Puerto Rico last year, all supposedly in the name of the war on drugs. These multi-jurisdictional task forces comprised of state and federal law enforcement and military units rousted 500 people from their homes and only made 5 arrests. In 1993, government housing projects in New York, Chicago, and Boston were also subjected to these same types of warrantless searches and seizures. If a gun was found in the home, the adults were arrested and their children were put into foster homes. Whether these raids are legal or not doesn't matter when people risk losing their children if they open their mouths. At the February 18, 1994 crime briefing, Janet Reno, Lloyd Benson, Henry Cisneros, and Al Gore announced that these raids had been tests, and these warrantless raids were going to be conducted across America. Of course, our media propaganda machine will do its part. You may remember our returning hero from peacekeeping in Somalia.
That is Durant holding the maroon beret, the distinctive maroon beret of the Night Stalkers. That is his airborne unit, the elite airborne unit.
Durant, with his maroon beret, was from the Night Stalkers in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Task Force 160th, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the guys who flew the black helicopters. In this home video from Somalia, you can see what the media didn't tell you. The day before Durant was shot down, he had been a pilot of the helicopters that, as usual, created its diversion by firing down into the crowd of unarmed civilians below. Notice the cannons at the front of the helicopters firing down into the crowd below. We don't have to wonder very long why these peacekeepers, these supposed heroes, were shot down in this domestic peacekeeping operation. Special operations groups are the key to all these operations. Conventional ground forces are not used, at least at first. The black helicopters are sent in along with the black cargo planes. They drop in their parachutists and then create a diversion by firing down on the city below. Our hand-picked media would have you believe that Panama was nothing but a third world, minor conflict with few casualties. The truth was revealed in the award-winning documentary, Panama Deception. As you can see, the devastation in Panama from their diversion was complete. Is it far-fetched to imagine that these UN peacekeeping forces would be used against American citizens? The 502nd, another unit from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, is shown here arriving as peacekeepers in Somalia wearing their UN blue berets and UN insignia. Shortly thereafter, this same unit, the 502nd, was in Arkansas practicing house-to-house searches and seizures in a joint UN training mission called Agile Provider in the spring of 1994. Agile Provider involved 44,000 UN troops, including troops from France and the Netherlands, training in the states of Georgia, North and South Carolina, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Yes, UN troops have been trained in this country in the past, but not in brigade strengths and not in domestic support house-to-house searches and seizures. Many of our congressmen deny that UN troops are being trained in this country at all, but as you can see in these clips from Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Germans were training here last spring.
Das ist die Baracke 1660, die da. Vom zweiten Zug, der Hitzschall, rollt.
UN training has become so widespread that many of the newspapers around the country have had at least one such story. In Washington state, Gurkha mercenaries have trained for 3 years in a row. Gurkha mercenaries are from Nepal, which is a primitive country.